On September 26, 2014, around 100 students from the Ayotzinapa Royal Teachers College in Guerrero, southern Mexico, got into a fracas with the police. 3 students were killed on the scene, and 43 of them were arrested, taken into police custody, and never heard from again. Almost 4 years later, not a trace of those 43 students has been found, and the government has been accused of failing to investigate the involvement of the federal police or the military. The official numbers of people forcibly disappeared in the country now stands at over 34,000. Human rights organisations say those responsible for the forced disappearances, arbitrary arrests and extrajudicial killings in the country continue to enjoy impunity. And so on July the 1st, the country will go to the polls to elect a new president in one of the bloodiest periods in Mexico since the 1910-20 revolution. So, ahead of the general election this week, I caught up with Lupita Valdez of Justice Mexico Now, a campaign group working to raise awareness in Britain of the country's human rights crisis. So we're joined with Lupita Valdez. Have I said it right?
Yes, correct.
Excellent.
Perfect.
From Justice Mexico Now.
Uh-huh.
And I wonder if you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your involvement with Justice Mexico Now and what that campaign is, stuff like that.
Well, I come originally from Tamaulipas in the northeast of Mexico, which is a pretty dangerous state right now. I moved out in 2010, so just about when the effects of the war on drugs were starting to feel. I remember, my friends started to be attacked or disappeared, some of them, and and a lot of kidnappings. So I started to feel that, and I don't know why. Like my guts told me, just find some opportunities abroad and see what where this leads. So I came to the UK in 2010 to study a postgrad course in UCL. When I became involved in Justice Mexico Now, we work in many topics. We started with Ayotzinapa, but the root of the Ayotzinapa case, it's the violence that has become the rule through the mechanisms that are being used to allegedly stop the violence. So they use the military and the Navy and the federal police, to tackle violence. But this has reinforced, and has, caused a series of, human rights violations. Not only, there is a lot of bloodshed from drug cartels, but then you involve the people, the government, the judicial forces that are supposed to protect you. You involve them in this, wave of violence, and that's where havoc gets loose, right? It becomes a bloodshed. The civilian population becomes trapped in the middle. And so that's what we do in Justice Mexico Now. We campaign against human rights violations on issues like forced disappearance, like the 43 students, extrajudicial killings, which happen a lot in Mexico, violence against activists, journalists, as you know, students and migrants. Migrants, they suffer a lot in Mexico. I mean, ironically, right? Because in the US, our migrants suffer a lot.
Exactly, yeah.
But in Mexico, oh my God, Central American
Where
migrants.
are most migrants coming from into Mexico? From
Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Hondureños, lots of Hondureños. They come to Mexico, and then it's quite a difficult journey for them if they manage to make it. That's a big problem.
In Mexico, is there a similar sort of, rhetoric on migrants as there is in the US and in Britain? Migrants are here stealing our jobs, but at the same time are taking all the welfare.
Actually no, not in the governmental level, but you can hear it from people, right? In the streets or in the towns, especially in the towns that are passageways of migrants. I'm from Tamaulipas, and we are marked by 2 big massacres. I mean, massive graves in Mexico are full of migrants, full of migrants. Just in Tamaulipas, we had 2 cases. One of a clandestine grave with 190 something bodies of migrants.
Wow.
And then the next year the year before, we had 78 or 75 bodies found in another clandestine grave in the same area.
When were these found?
that the first one was 2010, the second one 2011. But I mean, we have more than, since 2006 we have had more than 800 clandestine graves found in Mexico, which is, it's crazy, with more than 3,000 bodies. And I can, I don't have the cipher, but I can tell you a lot of these bodies are migrants. They get kidnapped by drug cartels, but they also get kidnapped by the police forces, and then, they get disappeared. They either pay a ransom, or they take, or they join the forces, the drug cartels, or they disappear.
I want to ask you about the elections coming up and the violence around that. But before we do that, it'd be quite interesting to talk about the term disappeared. Like, I think it's an interesting term, because it like, what does it mean? What does it mean to you? What does it mean in Mexico, this term disappeared?
Well, disappeared, right? That is the word we use when we fight for justice. But the government, what they try to use is the missing. No, you're a missing person.
Yeah.
But when you talk about forced disappearance, you're talking about an involvement of some sort of, some part of any governmental instance, whether judiciary, whether politician, whatever. So their involvement in a disappearance becomes forced disappearance, and then it becomes a whole different issue than if a drug cartel disappears you, or you become missing as well. But the problem is that we don't have a truthful record. We don't know, and even though there has been, there is testimony that a disappearance was done by the military, the government dismisses it and labels it as missing. So disappearance is just, for me, it equals eternal heartache, because you don't know where your loved one is. You don't know if they're dead or if they're alive. Hope dies at the very last, but that's not always a good thing. You're always in a stage of suffering. You can never actually mourn the disappeared, because just by principle you cannot acknowledge they're dead, because first you need some truth, you need justice, then you can mourn, and then you need reparation. It's just a limbo where thousands of families in Mexico are in this limbo of not knowing, and the government doesn't do anything. We work with some organizations that they are basically groups of families of the disappeared, and they buy shovels, they buy their instruments to look for bodies. They're looking for their loved ones, but in general they're just going out there because they say, I cannot sit here and not do anything. I need to find the bodies, because I know not only my loved one is there, but the loved one of the neighbor and the loved one of the other neighbor. And they do like varilla, which is like a long metal stick. They bury it underground, they take it out, and then they smell it to see if it smells like rotted.
Wow.
And they smell it, and they already know. They are trained in forensics. Now many families in Mexico, hundreds of them, they're trained in forensics, smelling and say, this smells like a rotten body. Okay, let's dig here. People, we found a clandestine grave, and they get happy. They're like, okay, here, and then it's just heartbreaking, no? They're not even looking for justice anymore. They don't want someone persecuted. They just want bodies and to know what happened. Sometimes they even go to the houses of people that they know might be involved, the families of the policemen or the families of the drug cartel members. They go and they just cry and plead, can you just tell me where they are? We're not gonna do anything. We're not gonna, give, present charges. We just want the body. And yeah, that's heartbreaking. Disappearance is a massive, word, black cloud on top of Mexico right now. You cannot have that.
And you said, I think you said that no one quite knows how many people have disappeared, right?
No, right now the official number is more than 30,000.
30,000.
But the unofficial number is more than 100,000.
Yeah.
Just to in the dictatorship in Argentina, the unofficial number was 30,000. So
Wow.
you can see the difference. It's. But also Mexico is quite big, and we've had this for many years. So yeah, it's impossible to know. It's just we cannot know.
Do you think that the situation in Mexico, because I guess the Morning Star, we cover it quite a lot, and obviously I read the paper working there, and so I feel like this is something I know a little bit about, but I don't know, when I'm talking to my friends and stuff, they don't seem to realise what's happening in Mexico. Do you think there's kind of like, it's not really talked about much here in Britain especially?
It is not known the gravity of it. You know what is especially not known? Yeah, I think people realize that Mexico is dangerous, but they don't know why, and they don't know the involvement of the government in it. And what happens is that you go to a country where perhaps you get disappear, you get you suffer of some sort of crime. The big problem of Mexico is then impunity. So if you're in some sort of trouble in Mexico, God bless you, because it's gonna be very hard for you to find someone to help you solve your problem, or to do an investigation of what happened to you. So justice you're not gonna find there. So it's worth, Mexico is a beautiful country, as long as nothing happens, but when it does, it becomes hell.
There's elections, I think, is it July the 11th?
The 1st.
July the 1st.
Yeah, very soon.
The last time that I saw was 111 politicians have been killed since last September.
Yeah.
But you have an updated number, right? As of today or yesterday?
As of last night, I stayed awake to watch the debate.
So as of June the 12th?
June the 12th, there were 116 people, politicians, or related murder during this election since September 2017. So in just these months, and just targeting, I mean, not talking about activists, journalists, general civilians, just talking about politicians, involved in campaigns. 116. I remember here when Joe Cox was murdered, it became a national mourning. Everyone from every party, the policemen. It's something. Here is they valued life. Even if she was not a politician, lives are valuable. One life is valuable, and then suddenly we have 116 people murdered, cold-blooded. Some, most of them just gone, shot it in their faces. What? And people are not, they don't feel enraged. They don't feel, they just continue their lives. I understand, right? Because if you live in a context like this, how could you continue your life thinking all of this is happening? You have to. You have to keep going to work. You have to keep sending your children to school. So in a way, you have to accommodate that in your mind and perhaps erase it. So I might understand people in Mexico, have become quite cold and, distantiated from all the violence surrounding them.
I find it hard to just get my head around that there's so many people have been killed, so many politicians in a run-up to an election.
Yeah, it's been one of the most bloody elections in Mexico, especially because it's the biggest one. It's the one where the most positions are being contested. So a lot of government positions, our states have a governor. So a lot of governors are going to take place. Elections are going to take place soon. Of course, the presidency election, but also a lot of small senator, municipal, the deputies are taking place. So because this is, there are so high stakes, politically speaking, it means that there is also a lot of high stakes involving power. Like who gets to keep the power? Who is going to hold the power after July the 1st, and who holds the power, holds the guns, holds the money, holds the control of the region. So it's basically, a war on control, on regional control. That's what it is.
So the people that are getting killed, these politicians are getting killed, are there people that have particularly pointed out the violence, or is there any method to the reason why these people are being killed, or is it just random?
Depends if they're. I mean, we have 116, so each person was murdered for different reasons. Some of them might have enemies on the drug cartels. Some of them might be especially strong in their discourse against the violence, which make them, of course, vulnerable to attacks. Some of them are winning, and then they're going to take the power from the current party. So then, of course, the adversaries are not happy about it, and they might be involved. But we cannot speculate. We don't know. I have no idea who pulled those triggers, but we know those triggers were pulled. These people are no longer alive, and there is no actually thorough investigations happening.
It's crazy that there's no investigation. That's one of the main things, the main points, right? Is that there's just no investigation.
Or sometimes investigation is open, but investigation is open, and that's it. And you get some speculation, but there is not actual forensic, thorough, So that it's very incomplete. And it's not because, it's very important to say this, it's not because of incompetence. Mexico has, very good forensic, we have good technology. It's because of will. That's the biggest missing word, in Mexico. Will, political will.
Generally in these cases, it's usually women that are the main victims of violence. So can you describe what's the situation like for women in Mexico at the moment? In sort of broad terms, if you can.
Well, of course, violence has impacted a lot women. In terms of femicides, we have some states with a very great crisis of femicides. We have, for example, Estado de Mexico, which has a red alert. We have Chiapas. We have Quintana Roo, which is a very touristy place. We have a femicide crisis there. We have Veracruz, but also in Mexico City, which you would think that is one of the places that has been, a bit above, all this violence that's happening in the other regions in Mexico. In the capital, it has remained quite, encapsulated and protected in a way, but you still get. Gender violence in Mexico is widespread, and then it's also widespread the impunity that comes with it. People that don't believe that a murder took place because of because you are a woman, just because it happened as a murder. No, they think it's just a general crime. But something that is very important that I would like to highlight is the role of the military, the Navy, and the police forces to feed this violence against women. Amnesty International last year gave a very nice report, a very thorough report on the violence inflicted from the police forces and the Navy military towards women, against women, and it's just astonishing. It's they said that they interviewed 100 women in jails, and they found that 72 of them reported sexual abuse
in the prisons
while they were detained.
Wow! Oh
Not
my
in
God.
the prisons, but while they were being detained.
Right.
70 report sexual abuse, and 33 had been raped.
Jesus.
Actually raped. It's just practices like group rape are not uncommon. They use torture, of course. At the end of the day, this sexual violence by the police forces, it's an extension of their own systematic practices of torture towards men, towards anyone that they believe they should be, that they can get a confession out of them. So that's, impunity extends, and then it becomes that once you get people charged for a crime, then you need to question those charges, because were they obtained through torture? Were they obtained through sexual violence? Is this confession, are their confessions coerced? A lot of these charges come from confessions, which already points to, why are so many of these criminals confessing? Of course, it comes from, the systematic use of torture. Systematic is very important because then it can be taken from international organizations of human rights as something systematic from the government, and then a crime against humanity. That's a very important word, and it has been found that police forces, military and navies forces use torture systematically. So you can see this in violence against women, but you can see also in violence against men. They use electric shock in genital areas. They use asphyxiation with plastic bags or with a pile of water, and they sometimes, many people report that they torture family members in front of them in order to obtain confessions.
Wow.
And once you confess, immediately you're taken in front of the media. They want to put your face in front of the cameras, saying, "Oh, this is the culprit, this is the criminal. We are doing our jobs. Look at us." And it becomes a circle of violence. That's where the authorities are actually part of it, rather than trying to solve it successfully. And then in Mexico we have this thing called arraigo, which basically they can grab you. It's a legal thing. It's constitutional. They can grab you and take you without any charge, without any investigation, nothing, for up to 80 days.
The military or the police or both?
Both.
Wow.
Both. They can keep you for up to 80 days without proving you've done anything bad, nothing. Just taking, like right now, you're in a coffee shop, you're taken, and legally you can be taken for up to 80 days. And God knows what happens to you during those 80 days. Usually, you are tortured.
What do you make of what's happening in the US, especially Trump's attitude towards Mexican people and the border wall, the Great Wall of Mexico, all these kind of things? What do you make of those?
Oh my God, he's such a clown. But it's a fun fact is that he's saying, we're gonna build a wall, but a wall is already there. Clinton built it. I don't remember if it's 60 or 70% of the border, but there is a wall already, and it was paid by the US, by the way.
Because that's the thing. Trump wants Mexico to pay for this wall.
To pay for it, yeah. But also, the parts where there is no wall are the parts that are so hard for migrants to cross. It's just, it's deserts, it's mountains, it's like, geographically, it's very hard for them. That's why actually they didn't build a wall there in the first place. I mean, of course, the original plan was to build a wall all over the border. But they couldn't, because in these parts it's almost impossible to build an actual wall. And even if they don't have wall, they have patrol, forces on the other side. So there is like a human wall already there. He's of course saying we need to pay it, but this is part of his demagogy. He's very macho stand. He's very he says what he thinks, and he doesn't think very thoroughly things. So here he's saying, you are gonna pay, and of course Mexico politicians we are not gonna pay. And then the actual important things are being buried in this clownery, in this battle of clowns.
Okay, so we've just moved inside because it's getting really noisy outside.
Yes.
We were just in the middle of talking about the situation in Britain. So Britain's involvement with Mexico, and are they raising enough awareness of what's happening in Mexico, do you think?
In terms of the government, we have had a lot of NGOs coming and meeting with the APPGs, which is the all-party parliamentary groups involved, from Labour to Conservatives to Liberal Democrats, a lot of politicians. And then we meet with them, and then the people from Mexico that are either families of disappeared or organizations, they present their cases. So in that sense, we've had involvement with the government here. However, I think the strongest push has come from certain MPs that have their hearts on topics like human rights, and from unions, which, for example, the National Union of Teachers was very involved, or has been very involved in the Ayotzinapa case, because the 43 disappeared students they were studying to become teachers. So that's become very central in their international agenda of the NUT, because basically it's a flagrant, attack towards people studying to become teachers. And in that sense, we feel grateful because we've had support not only of them but also of some MPs that have, they've sent letters to politicians in Mexico, just saying, I wish you could explain me why this case has not been investigated. I want to know more about this. I want to know more, especially we had an early day motion, in Parliament regarding the security, the internal security law, which is a law that is attempting to constitutionalize, or the militarization of the country, which is very dangerous. I can't believe that we have not learned anything from our friends, in South America, in Brazil, in Chile, in Venezuela, in Argentina. This militarization never leads to a good place.
No.
Never. And we've seen it already. We've had 10 years, more than 10 years, to actually see it. It's been in front of our eyes, and now, they don't care. The law was passed, was actually pushed right in December. Of course, in December, holidays, people were not paying lots of attention, and then it passed by January, February, and by the last couple of months, it's been already passed by both chambers in Mexico. So it's going. This is very troublesome because it basically leaves the public security on the hands of the military for a non-defined amount of time. So it's going to be very hard. It's going to be very hard for future politicians or for the future president to demilitarize the country. Once you give, money, freedom, and all this kind of, even some kind of political leverage, which is the most dangerous thing, to give political leverage to the military. And you can see it slowly because of, the military members have slowly taken more and more part of, in the media, in reunions with the president, with the chambers. It's been, for me, to be part of this, I've constantly seen more and more green suits in political environments. And that is very worrying for everyone involved.
It's like opening Pandora's box, isn't it?
Yes, and closing it is going to be very hard. So hard that none of the candidates right now is stating that they are going to take the military from the streets. Because, of course, we do have a crisis with the drug cartels, right? And we need some sort of, strong, group fighting them. But also because they cannot suddenly take the money invested already in the militaries. They cannot take them out of the street. It would be very hard for them to do it. I mean, their lives would be in danger, I would dare to say. We had politicians currently talking against this law, but not only politicians, they just follow the international organizations that have already said, the UN has said, what are you doing, Mexico? What's happening? And that Amnesty International, Peace Brigades International, Human Rights Watch, the Washington office, lots of IOs are saying, what are you doing? And then the MPs have become interested, because if the international community is so worried, it means that something very bad is going on. They've helped us a lot regarding that, and of course, international push is very important to perhaps not to make a radical change, but at least to make politicians think twice, or perhaps thrice, on the impacts that their actions might have, if not in the country for their citizens, at least internationally regarding the international community, you know? And maybe, you know, they don't want to stain Mexico's name so much internationally. They want to keep it clean, and maybe that has some sort of leverage. That's the leverage we try to be using, us working from abroad, right? Of course, our job is not to stay in Mexico, but to say, if this keeps going on, you know, there is no way that you can claim that Mexico's reputation is clean. The amount of money lost to violence has been almost 20% of the Producto Interno Bruto, the economy, like the
GDP or something?
The GDP.
Yeah.
The GDP. Sorry, I do sociology, not economy. The GDP, almost 20% of it has suffered because of the violence. And this is according to international organizations that know how to measure this issue. I was reading it last night. I was preparing for this interview. But yeah, that's amazing. And people keep saying, maybe the future candidate is going to be a threat to economy in Mexico. Oh my God, our economy is completely under threat already.
Yeah. The person you're talking about there, would that be the
AMLO? AMLO, Andrés Manuel, yeah.
What's his name? Could you say his name?
Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
Obrador, right?
Obrador.
Yeah.
Right. It's always funny, right? Because they say that your last names often dictates what you managed, what you accomplish in life, your profession, like locksmith, and my supervisor is Woodgate, and he's a wood. He's involved in wood, conservation, and then Obrador, and he's, labor.
What does it mean, Obrador?
Obrador, it relates a bit to obrero, which is a bit like, work, the working class.
Right, yeah. So he's the working class candidate.
The working class candidate, and his last name is basically that.
That's cool.
Obrador.
That's great. So we run an interesting story. I don't know, you may have seen it in the Borisov and elsewhere. There was the owner of a mining company. I can't remember the name of the mining company now.
La Rea?
And he wrote this letter to his staff or to the papers saying, like, you mustn't vote for him because he's going to wreck the economy. But
Yeah.
it sounds like what you're saying, the economy's already being wrecked by the violence.
It is. I have many friends that had, small business, small enterprises. And you receive threats, by the drug cartel saying either you pay us a certain amount of your, each month, or we kill you. And then you have this sort of like two options. You say, I give money to the violent groups, then they are going to inflict more violence, and then might be, impacting my family, or I get killed. So your option is, I close my business. And hundreds of businesses have closed because of that. You don't want to contribute to them, but you don't want to get murdered. So you just, you quit and you go to your office. You go to the office every day and you keep working, so that you're not requested this kind of,
This kind of
dilemma.
Protection money,
Yeah. And lots of big companies like Lala, which is the biggest distributor of milk in the country. Milk, come on, I mean, it's one of the staple foods of every country, has had to withdraw from several states because of violence, because the situation has become too violent for them to keep working there.
Wow.
And then you say, well, how much of a threat it is to the economy if the economy is already under threat? You want it? I don't know. It's worth thinking about it. It's always worth thinking about, economy impacts in the future. But what about the now? What about, analyzing the now? What's going on right now? The devaluation of the dollar has been quite big in this last sexenio, which is in the last presidential period. The Mexican peso has crashed on respect with the dollar. So we have already a sort of like an economic crisis. And then in the previous governmental period, which is the one from Felipe Calderón, the one that created the war on drugs initially, he even dressed as a military. Imagine a president dressed in green military clothes. That was like, oh my God! I mean, people criticize this candidate because he's apparently, I mean, he admires Castro and Hugo Chavez, but we have this other president dressed as a military and deployed the military throughout the country. Oh my God, that's I don't know. It's ironic. But then he claimed to be good for the economy. However, the problem is that the economy of informality, people that just put, like a taco place outside their homes, or they work as housekeeping in their house, and they're not enrolled in the formal economy, grew massively. Meaning that, yes, of course, employed people grew, but in the informal sector. And the informal sector is, as you know, quite vulnerable. You have no access to health, to public health. You have no access to a pension. You have no access to the labor rights. You can be exploited. So in which kind of situation have we been?
It's like, whose interest did he serve there, really? So we should wrap it up. But one of my last questions is what can, people listen to this or reading the Star or looking at Justice Mexico Now, what can people do to get involved with Justice Mexico Now?
Well, we do a lot of events. We do either lectures or screenings or fundraisings, or we have constant events going on in our webpage. We have a Facebook page. Soon we will launch our own webpage. But right now people can follow us in our Twitter or in our Facebook account. In Twitter we are like Justice Mexico UK.
At Justice Mexico UK.
At Justice Mexico UK. And then in Facebook we are as Justice Mexico Now. You can find us, and there we publish all our events. We recently had one in Parliament, basically talking about electoral violence and human rights crisis, of course. And what you can do is that in instances where the politicians are pushing an early day motion or perhaps sending a letter, then it's worth for you to write your MP and say, "Hi MP, would you be so kind, to please sign this early day motion because it's important to, safekeep the human rights in Mexico. I'm very interested in that. Could you please just adhere to that early day motion, or to sign that letter as well?" And that, even one people doing that in each region to an MP causes the MP to do it. So it doesn't have to be hundreds of people. Just you sending a letter might push your MP to actually participate. And the more MPs we get, the higher the impact, the international impact we have in Mexico. And that helps. If not actually changes things, at least families and victims feel accompanied. And that's a huge, feeling, not feeling alone in this.
It's like other people know what's happening.
That's the first thing, that's actually a form of violence, right? The lack of information, that your suffering remains contained. But once people start to know about what's going on, you feel that something is mobilizing, something is happening, and you don't lose hope, basically, at the end of the day. That's accompanying people in Mexico. So that's what we...